Hello and a big welcome from me, Reese, here at the Bookshop Crawl UK channel as part of the London Bookshop Crawl 2024. Living here in the UK, we are very lucky in that London is filled to the brim with many exciting bookshops and book-related museums, one of which is the excellent Cartoon Museum. Situated within walking distance of Oxford Circus, the Cartoon Museum aims to guide you through the development of British cartooning from the 18th century right to the present day. Joining us today as our guest speaker is the wonderful Steve Marchant, Learning Coordinator at the Cartoon Museum. Steve, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Reese.
So, Steve, just a little about yourself, if that's all right. So, how did you come to end up in this role at the Cartoon Museum?
Oh, it was a tortuous journey. So I'm a cartoonist, essentially. I grew up loving comics and cartoons, so much so that eventually I tried to do it myself in my early 20s, and I became quite successful. And I became successful by targeting my work in areas that I thought weren't well served by cartoons. I was a part-time youth worker, so I began doing cartoons for the youth service, funny ways of putting across useful information to errant teens, and that they hopefully wouldn't throw in the bin on the way home from the youth club. And yeah, I kind of cornered that kind of market, and that led to me teaching in schools and libraries and elsewhere, and eventually here at the Cartoon Museum. And I've been on and off. I've been working for the Cartoon Museum since 1995, but it's been more on than off for the last 10 years. Now I'm a full-time member of staff, teaching children and running the entire education program. So we have a thriving program aimed at the families of autistic children.
Oh, wow.
So, which we won a mega award for at the start of this year. So, that's what I am, basically, a cartoonist and an educator.
That's a great thing to be. I have to admit, the Cartoon Museum, situated in the centre of London, I've always wondered what its footfall is like. But every time I've been in there, it seems very busy. How do you feel, sort of being right in the heart? You're literally right in the heart of central London, really, aren't you?
Yeah, well, it's a good space to be in. That it is central, so it means everybody can get here fairly easily. As you mentioned, we're very close to Oxford Circus tube station. Goodge Street isn't much further away, so we're very accessible to all parts of London and all parts of the UK if people are visiting London. And yeah, but visitor numbers do vary day to day. I can't tell you how many people we're in today, but it can be anything up to 100 people a day or more. And then some days, maybe if the weather's poor or there's a train strike, then it might only be 20 or 30 people. But we're never packed, kind of busy. But often I go for a walk around and there'll be 20 or 30 people walking about at any one time.
That's good to hear. I mean, that's part and parcel of what London Bookshop Crawl was created for, which is why we're so pleased that so many of the museums and galleries related to literature are asking to be involved nowadays. And it was invented just so that we can try and encourage people to come to central London to bookshops in February, which is, as you say, one of the wettest and dullest months, really, as a sort of for bookshop owners as well as museums such as yourself. Have you at the moment what's is on at the moment? What displays have you got going on at the moment?
Okay, well, we've got 3 displays. In the main gallery, that's our semi-permanent exhibition showing the history of cartoon art from the 18th century to modern times. Although that is, fingers crossed, we're going to do a bit of a rehang next year. So there will be some items removed and some new ones to take their place. Within that space, there's also our In Focus Cube, which is a small display area with a changing roster of artists about 6 times a year. And currently it's a Nigerian artist called Babatunde, and he's done his own line of superhero graphic novels. And so we're showing some of the artwork from those. And we're selling his book in our shop. Here in the classroom, this is where I teach, by the way, but it's also where we currently display some of the comic art from our collection. And then in the temporary exhibition gallery on the far side of the museum, that's Wallace and Gromit, celebrating 30 years since they've made the film The Wrong Trousers, and which is hilarious. And we've got lots of the production art. So the original sketches that Nick Park did, just working out what the trousers might look like, trying out different ideas that didn't make it into the film. We've got a lot of the storyboards where the animators, just like a comic strip, they just lay out picture by picture each scene of the film. And then we've got some of the props that we used, and we've got a gallery of photographs that were taken while they were making the film. So you can see all stages of it being made. I'm very surprised by how small Wallace and Gromit actually are. I always had the feeling from watching the show that maybe they were about 12 inches tall or something.
Right, okay.
No, they're about, maybe 5-6 inches at the most. Like really, really small models. And the sets, like Wallace's living room, it's like about as big as the average laptop. I mean, it's just, tiny. So it's a great fun exhibition. My favourite thing in there is where we've got a screen showing the storyboards on one side and the scenes from the actual film on the other side at the same time. So you can see just how closely they stuck to that. So it's been one of our most popular exhibitions in a very long time. And it's on until April. So there's still plenty of time.
Plenty of time. So yeah, that was going to be my next question. So being honest to all those people who are viewing this right now, obviously this is broadcast in February. So at the moment we're actually at the end of December. So this is us filming this pre-festivities. And so I was going to ask for the next question, which was that's what's on at present. That all of those things will still be there in February, presumably.
Oh yeah, everything I just said. That'll be definitely there in February through till late spring.
Lovely. One of the things I was going to ask you, the museum holds quite a lot, doesn't it? As in, not just that's on show, things that are backstage, things that are sort of in the archive, so to speak. Is there sort of any hidden gems that are currently not on display that you particularly like?
Well, here's the thing. When we moved to this building in 2019, because we used to be by the British Museum, me and Steve Bell, the cartoonist who until fairly recently was working for The Guardian, he's one of our trustees. And so me and him began going through the archives, searching for artwork that we could put on display here that had never been seen. We found stuff we just didn't even know we had. We found stuff that neither Steve nor myself or anybody else in the team knew what it was or where even it had come from. So there's a lot of stuff that still hasn't been on display, but a lot of it is like really obscure. So before we put anything on display, we have to do a lot of research so we can accurately credit it and supply some information about it. But I mean, something I can definitely tell you isn't currently on display, and I wish is more of our comic art collection. So here in the classroom, we have about 15 pictures, but we've got about 450.
Wow.
Yeah, because we had a national lottery grant some years ago now, where we were given £100,000 to buy British comic art. Because cartoon art, the single image cartoons from newspapers and books and wherever, got loads of it, as I'm saying, stuff we don't even know what it is. But the comic art, it was a lot less so. It was random bits and pieces that people had donated. So we put in saying we wanted to have a comic art collection for the nation to rival our cartoons. And mercifully, the lottery agreed. So they gave us £100,000. And I got the job for 5 years of spending it on comic art. Because I was the only person here, who's more of an expert on that than the.
I'm gonna say, Steve, that sounds like a chore. Clearly, to spend £100,000.
Yeah, oh god, yeah. It was the best job I've ever had, and it basically meant that for 5 years, if people bought a lottery ticket and they didn't win, I got their money. And I spent it on comic art, and I'd love to be able to show the public more of what we had. At the old museum, we had a whole mezzanine gallery showing the comic art. Currently, it's just a few items in our classroom. But, as I mentioned, all being well next spring, there's going to be a bit of a rehang in the main gallery. And me and the director have already been discussing a more dedicated area for a lot more of the comic art to be put on display. And I've got great favourites there that aren't currently there. We have a page from Watchmen, one of the most famous graphic novels in the world. Now, we've had it on display in this room before, but I think that's something we should always have on display. Along with, we've got several pages from V for Vendetta, also written by Alan Moore, who wrote Watchmen, and a lovely page from a graphic novel series called The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, written by Alan Moore, not to be confused with a terrible film they made based on it 20 years ago. The books are far, far better, and we've got a beautiful page from that, which I would love to put back on display. I will put back on display next spring if I get the chance. But also what's not currently on display, and people do get daily visitors asking, where's the Hogarth? William Hogarth is considered one of the fathers of cartoon art and indeed comic strip art. He was the first fellow to have the idea of telling a story in pictures rather than just simply having one big picture with stuff going on. He did a sequence of pictures that told a story, usually a kind of moral fable. And we have a six picture story by him, original prints from those days, from the late 18th century, of a story called Marriage à la Mode, or Modern Marriage, as we would say. And like many of his stories, they're like moral fables. Marriage à la Mode is basically about a feckless young man who gets some young woman to fall in love with him, and he then wastes the family's money, and they all end up destitute. And it's pretty grim, I suppose. But I mean, Hogarth was a social commentator, and there are humorous aspects within it. That we used to have on display just around the corner from where you can see it behind me. But about a year ago, we had a flood coming from the restaurant upstairs, because we're in the basement, and above us is a very fancy restaurant. One of their pipes burst, and we had a flood, and all this water spilled out dangerously close to the Hogarth prints. So yeah, we were really worried. But when we checked, mercifully, the water hadn't touched them, but it came pretty damn close. So all of that is gone at the moment. We're not displaying anything on that particular wall in the museum. And when we do this rehang next year, they will all go back up in a different area. So I'll be very pleased to see those back on display. So yeah, there's tons of stuff we don't even know that we've got. It's always a bit of an adventure going through the archives.
We love hearing about sort of hidden gems and things like that. It's something that I work for a school in Canterbury, and they have a big archive for the school. And it's I know that feeling, going down into, it's in a basement at our school as well, actually. Go down into the basement, into the archives, and sort of find all these sort of hidden gems from years gone by, from when you were hunting for something for an alumni who wanted something. And it's a lovely experience. I mean, you mentioned Alan Moore as an author and illustrator. I presume that's one of the ones that you particularly like. But are there any others that you feel that influence you, perhaps?
I mean, I've read so many comics, and little bits and bobs of different creators go in and kind of percolate and create a strange creative stew, I suppose. A couple I'll mention that have been particularly influential. I think three, in fact. Charles Schulz, who wrote and drew Peanuts, featuring Snoopy and Charlie Brown, for 50 years, every day for 50 years. And boy, were his arms tired. And sort of they really address issues in life, about how we treat each other, about feelings. Charlie Brown, the perpetual outsider, just a picture of despair, really. And growing up, I read those, and I identified with him very strongly. And I just like the way that like Schultz could make something kind of grim but funny at the same time. And that certainly inspired my own work. A lot of my strips I sought to be kind of like both sad and funny at the same time. Other creators from the last 30 odd years, I'm a huge fan of a man called Daniel Clowes. He's most famous for doing a graphic novel about 30 years ago called Ghost World, which got made into a film in around 2000. starring Scarlett Johansson. I think it was her first film. Ghost World isn't about ghosts. It's about two teenage girls growing up in a really boring town. And it's just really very sarcastic and funny. And it got made into a very sarcastic and funny film. And But his new book just came out a couple of months ago. It's called Monica. And it's about a grown-up young woman trying to track down whatever happened to her parents after she was left to live with her grandparents. And so she's traveling across America, meeting all manner of strange and unusual people. Some people compare Klaus's work to David Lynch, and it's not wholly inaccurate. And I'll also mention the Hernandez brothers, who've been writing and drawing their own comics for 40 odd years now. They do a comic between the two of them called Love and Rockets. It's not about science fiction. They've both got their own set of characters, and they're kind of stories about life, really. They've got characters that have grown up with the comic, that have aged 40 years. And so characters that began as teenagers are now in their late middle age. And they're both extremely brilliant artists and wonderful storytellers. And that's the thing with comics, is a lot of the time you get a lot of very fancy art, but the story maybe not so much. And it's very rare that you find something where the art and story are equal. Things like Alan Moore has chosen great artistic collaborators. As I said, the Hernandez brothers write and draw their own material, as does Klaus. But a lot of the other stuff, very pretty to look at, but not much to read. And of course, occasionally that goes the other way. Sometimes you have stuff that's a right rollicking read, but the pictures aren't really up to it. But that's comics for you,
Yourself, do you illustrate as well as create your own, or is it?
I've done both. I mean, I prefer to write and draw my own stuff. And that's how I began, was just literally, I'd moved to London, I'd left art college, moved to London. I didn't have a television. And so I was just, in the evenings, just amuse myself by writing and drawing my own funny, sad but funny comic stories. And that's what I still prefer to do, except now being full-time here, I don't get an awful lot of time to do that. But I also did, earn money illustrating scripts that magazines would send me. Again, mostly to do with social work and youth work and things like that. But they knew that kids might stop and read it if it looked a bit like the Beano. And my stuff's not exactly like the Beano, but it wouldn't be too far out of place.
It's one of the things that is prevalent in our house is the Phoenix. My children subscribe to the Phoenix and have done since just before COVID. It was one of the things that we hit go on a subscription around that time, and were then gifted. I think they must have been gifted about 200 back issues by someone else. Fantastic. So we've got piles of them all around the house. And I'm very sort of thankful to it, to be honest, because it means that both my children now, one of which loves writing stories, one of which loves drawing. So actually between them both, they sort of create their own, and it's just delightful. Do you find that when young people come to your museum, do you think things like the Phoenix are sort of like the defining thing of that's this sort of generation?
I wouldn't say it's defining. It gets mentioned. I always ask kids, whether it's school kids or the kids that come to our holiday workshops, I always ask them, what kind of cartoons do they like? What kind of comics do they read? Some kids will say they've never read a comic. So I give them a Beano to take home, because we've got piles of them here. The Beano gets mentioned a lot. The Phoenix gets mentioned, but maybe in a class of 30 kids, 10 of them read the Beano, 2 of them read the Phoenix. But, I'm not down on the Phoenix. I mean,
no.
I think it's absolutely great. But I just think it doesn't have the same market reach that the Beano does, or Marvel, or that stuff. You can't just pop into Smith's and get the Phoenix, and you don't find it in your corner shop. So, which is a shame. But I mean, the distribution side of the comics business can be a very, very expensive thing.
Absolutely.
I know for a fact that W.H. Smith charge publishers a fortune simply to be able to have the magazines on their shelves. So, that's why. But that's what has led to really the explosion of online publishing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of great comic stuff that you can watch, on the internet. You can get it either just bland through it, or there's the kind of online weekly comics. I mean, one run by a very good friend of mine, David Lloyd, who drew V for Vendetta. He has an online comic called Aces Weekly, and it's weekly, except the comic doesn't come through your letterbox, or you don't buy it at the shop. You log on with your username, and for £1 a week, you get to read some amazing comics by some top creators from all around the world. In the very early days, that also included me, but then I realised I'm not a top creator. But, no, I've known David many years. He's a wonderful bloke, and he's kind of semi-retired from comics now. But Aces Weekly remains his passion. So I urge any of you listeners to check out Aces Weekly. £1 a week. That's cheaper than the Beano.
Absolutely.
And if you're fans of the Phoenix, would especially like it. There's a lot of Phoenixy stuff.
Very good.
And it's all, there's nothing rude or anything like that.
Well, Steve, thank you very much for talking to us a little about the museum and about your own background and the people you particularly like. Before we go, we tend to ask just one very quick question at the end about something that you are looking forward to this year. So is there a expected comic or a book or anything like that that you're looking forward to coming out this year?
Well, in 2024, bearing in mind this is a bit of time travel going on here,
yeah.
I'm not entirely aware of publishers' schedules. I'm always interested to see what a company called Rebellion are releasing. Now, Rebellion are the company that now own the rights to every comic ever published since 1900, apart from things like the Beano, the Dandy, Bunty, and so on. That's the Scottish company DC Thompson, and they still own all that. But all the other little companies that were around in that 120-year period, some of them they eventually merged and amalgamated, and then a company called Rebellion, who've got money to burn, they just bought the lot. And so every year they bring out what they call the Treasury of Comics, and it's a series of hardback books reprinting classic comics from the 1950s, the 60s, the 70s, stuff I remember growing up, and stuff that young people enjoy, because it's like, a lot of these characters have endured, and now in an affordable fashion, they can read the earliest adventures of different British comic characters. So it's always great to see what they're bringing out. And I will mention, just before I go, a book I recently read, which I've been looking forward to reading for ages, and I couldn't find a copy anywhere until I went to Gosh Comics in London, my favourite comic shop. They're brilliant. One of the few comic shops you walk in and ask for something, and they know what it is. So anyway, this book, I recommend it to all of your listeners. It's a graphic novel called Why Don't You Love Me? And it's by a man called Paul B. Rainey. And I've liked his stuff off and on for many years. But it's a hardback, it's about 20 quid, but man, oh man, you read it, and it's like, I guarantee you'll be reading it a second time straight away. It is so amazingly crafted, and it's only by the time you get to the end that you suddenly realise all these things that were mentioned or seen or said through the 200 pages previously all added up to something you weren't quite expecting. So you go right back to the beginning again, and you can see all those clues, and you're like, it's one of the cleverest written graphic novels I've ever seen, even including the ones by Alan Moore and Clowes and all the people I mentioned. Why Don't You Love Me by Paul B. Rainey. It's about a dysfunctional couple with 2 kids, and then stuff happens.
That's a very good endorsement. Very well articulated. I've not heard of that one before, so that's certainly something. I've certainly heard of Gosh Comics, though. They're one of the wonderful bookshops that often take part as part of Bookshop Crawl UK. So that's always somewhere that we end up going, which is lovely. Well, Steve, thank you so much for your time. It really is appreciated, and we hope that many of the people on the bookshop crawl this year in London come in to visit while they're in the area. Hopefully, you get a good footfall this February. Steve, thank you very much for your time.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Reese.